Hey everybody, stick around for this week's project. It's going to be a really cool maple tree round drum table.
Hi everybody, it's Mark Myers, the family woodworker. Hey, this week's project is going to feature a hard maple tree round, about 1.5 inches thick. It's got some great dark brown and some vanilla color in it, and I really like the irregular shape of it as well, because it's going to fit in with a rustic style of furniture that I'm creating for my basement. It's going to make a terrific companion piece to the coffee table that we just finished in walnut. Check that video out. And it's also going to match another side table that I've created with a maple top like this before I started to shoot the video. Ultimately, it's going to make a great 3-piece set, rustic, and it's going to be low cost because aside from buying your tree round, I'm going to make the rest of it out of reclaimed pallet wood. Now, you can find pallet wood everywhere. Just look around your neighborhood and you'll see sort of an industrial complex, and there'll be pallets stacked up in a sign that says free. So you go in there with your hammer and your pry bar, you take stuff apart, and you can bring it home in your trunk. And that is actually what I did for this type of wood. But this is oak. It's a little beat up, it's got some cracks, but I'm going to cut it into strips and use it for a design that I did on my first drum table. So it's going to be very low cost. It'll be recycling of the pallet material, and again, just great ideas for you at home as well. Something else we're going to do with this project that'll be unique. My coffee table was in pretty good shape. I had a couple of small little nicks and pits in the grain, and it turned out that urethane filled those in nicely. But on this guy, there's a pretty significant crack up here, some cracks that don't go all the way through, but they're very deep here, and I'm going to need to fill those. So you're going to see some techniques that you'll see on YouTube elsewhere, where you'll fill these in with epoxy. Sometimes it's just straight epoxy, but I'm also going to use a kind of a glossy powdered colorant mixed with the epoxy to give it a little accent. I haven't figured out what color I want to use yet, but I will have to fill these cracks before I turn it into a finished piece. So that is the project. I hope you stick around. It should be fun.
So here are the two pieces that are completed. First of all, there's our walnut coffee table that we featured a couple of weeks ago. And next to it is a piece that I did before I even started to think about shooting videos. And again, it's a very cool looking tree round with are cut very close to the stump on a maple tree. I also created it with a small magnetic door. We're going to try to mimic this design. And so I've got to fill the cracks, and it looks like when I look at the top of the piece that only a couple of the cracks go straight through. A lot of them kind of look like they'll leak through. So to prevent that leakage, I just used painter's tape to seal them up on the back side. The biggest problem is going to be this big crack on the front. So I'll have to hopefully get the tape to stick and go up the side of the slab so that it can seal it up like I'm doing here. I also mentioned when I did the walnut coffee table project that this is usually the hard part of the project, is trying to find a beautiful piece of wood like that. And again, you have to go to a specialty wood store, a specialty lumber yard, or point you in the direction where you can find that. This particular piece cost me, I think, about $35 to buy that tree round, but it came planed and it was flat. So again, not a lot of finish that has to be done to get it prepped, but but in this particular case, it had some cracks. So I'm mixing up some epoxy, and you just saw me put in a little bit of colorant. I chose copper. I've seen a lot of pieces done with a sort of a translucent green and blue, but I was looking for an accent, and I didn't want to take away from the beautiful color of the maple. And like you can already see, although it's really, it'll jump out at you when we put finish on it. There's plenty of brown, there's a lot of vanilla, until you look up close, and you'll see a close-up shot at the end of the video. There's even some spalting black lines in the tree, which is a fungus that can naturally grow in a tree like this. and it creates these cool little black lines on the very light part of this tree round. So after we get this filled up with the epoxy mixed with a little bit of copper, we're going to start talking about building a template so that we can build a base for this particular table. And so if you've got some paper, or for that matter, it can even be scrap newspaper, you just want to draw an outline of your tabletop. We're going to use this as sort of a design guide for a natural flowing table design. So initially I'm going to cut out this perimeter. What I don't show is I'm going to wind up taking another inch off this entire diameter, because we've got a base that'll sit on the bottom, and then we're going to put our slats on the exterior, you'll see in a minute, which will take up another 1/2 inch. So I want the reveal to be about a 1/2 inch of tabletop and base that go beyond where the wooden slats will fit. So you saw me sketch out the original diameter of that tree round. I took an inch off of that. I sketched it on 2 pieces of plywood, and I cut out 2 of those with a jigsaw. And so now it's time for cutting the slats. I have my plywood all set up. It's just waiting for me, and I'm going to have to cut a lot of these slats, more than you would expect. But the wood is free. It was a little bowed, and there's going to be cracks in a couple pieces, and I'll wind up throwing those away. I'm cutting these about a 1/2 inch thick on the table saw. Again, I'm using a table saw, but part of what I'm trying to pitch for our viewers is that if you found just regular pallet wood and it had those wide slats, these are things you could cut into strips with a circular saw. So I've got my 2 pieces of plywood. The slats are going to attach to both of these, and the hard part is getting started without figuring out how to clamp and hold all this stuff in place. So I just handheld this and to get the first slat started in the same exact place on both the top and the bottom pieces of plywood, and it worked out okay. Now these next pieces are going to be temporary, just to hold the whole thing together, and I'll be removing those as I move my way around the table. So again, this is the plywood you're not going to see, and it's just there to support the vertical slats. And again, this design matches the previous table that I did, again, before I even thought about shooting any of these videos. So it's a little bit of a tedious process. You're going to be doing one at a time. Eventually you're going to pull out a level and make sure that it's still going good. And as you get closer to the sacrificial piece here on the right, I'm just going to pry that out, and then we'll continue building the slats around the perimeter of the table. So it turns out to be kind of fun. You are going to mix and match your pieces. I found out when I picked up some of this pallet wood, there was definitely some oak. But when I started to cut into some of the other pieces, it looked like another piece was ash. And we'll just finish it a little inside view on how the slats go together. In fact, there's an oak piece, and now I'm putting in it looks like another piece of oak next to it. But the point is, the woods turned out to be of mixed variety, and it won't matter because I'm going to be using a really dark stain on those slats. Now to cut the base, it's all about the base. I've got 3 more slats that they're not necessarily flat. They're kind of flat, but they aren't necessarily going to line up. Now I don't have a professional jointer, so I was looking for 3 pieces that if I slid them back and forth, I could find them where they would line up pretty closely. Not perfect, but pretty closely. And that gives me enough of a flat area to consider making a base. And I'm really looking for the base to be about the same diameter as my tabletop. So if I can find it and I can make it fit, even maybe have it about a 1/2 inch over on the bottom to give it a little bit more support. So when I've got it to fit, I traced it out with pencil lines. And there are a couple of spots that are high. So without a jointer, And there is a way to do it with a tabletop and a router, but I have a hand plane that's pretty sharp, so there were just a couple of spots that were high that prevented these pieces of lumber to sit together flat. So all I really did was mark them out in a pencil where the high spots were. You can even see some of the nail holes. You know, I was looking for it to be rustic, and you know, man, it's rustic. So after I take off the high spots and I try to match it up again, it looks like it matched up pretty well. One of the other drawbacks to I'll have to do another video about the size of my wood shop. I don't have a very big work table. I just don't have a lot of space. So nothing in my shop is very heavy duty. So to put the pieces together, I had a choice between biscuits or dowels. And I originally thought about biscuits, but as I just test fit clamps, the pieces of wood slid back and forth because there's no flat spot to attach the clamps to. So it turns out that the dowels provided a really great way to lock the pieces together so that when I did put clamps on them, it would hold, even when I put the clamps in goofy positions. And I'm using a urethane glue here, without talking about brand names, but the glue with a little bit of water on the opposite side fills in any little nooks and crannies and gives you a really great bond. So that with my clamps in odd positions pulled it together pretty nicely, even better than I'd hoped. And I got a really strong base out of it that required some sanding. Also, I'm matching the trim that I did on the original drum table, which had a little bit of a routed edge to it. And this particular router I think I've had for 15 years. It was an old gift that I had gotten when I first started to do woodworking. It isn't a very expensive router. So again, kind of a shout out for people that are just starting a wood shop, and as you build up your tools, you really don't have to dump a ton of money to get started. And a router is a nice add-on piece. Hey, you know, Christmas gift, birthday gift, Father's Day, Mother's Day. So we'll get the edge on that, and now I can attach and I've not finished putting in all the slats, but I can attach the base to the bottom that I just routed out. And the reason why it's still open like this, because I needed to attach the plywood to the actual bottom and the top. So now that the plywood is attached both to the bottom and the top, screwed in, I can finish putting the slats on the table and close it in. Now I'm not going to build a door on this one. I have that removable door on the first piece that I did, but this one was smaller, and it's just going to act as a drum table without any storage. I never saw any. I thought about whether or not I need to take it apart ever. It's small enough, it's not that heavy. It's got some good weight to it, but it's not that heavy, it's easy to move, so I just assembled it really as a finished glued together piece. Now the challenge is going to come in a little bit further down. I tried to mix my woods here too, between the oak and the ash, and there was a third variety of wood I never figured out, but I just mixed the widths together as I work around the odd shape of this tree round. I like the organic shape of this, I really do. It's different, and you know, the shape is going to mimic the actual shape of the top, much like the first table that I did, and you'll see another picture of that at the end. I'll also tell you that eventually I ran out of these things and I had to go find another piece and cut some more slats, you know, because you run out. You try to take a guess on what you're going to need, and you have to go back and create some more. And as I go around the tight curves in this particular section, it seemed like the smaller diameter slats worked better, just because they handle the curve a little bit better than it seemed like the oak slats that I cut from that pallet lumber were pretty thick. A little bit more than an inch, actually, in width or dimension. And even with the video speeded up, it seems to want to take forever. Also the glue choice. This is not a traditional, finished tabletop glue. I wound up using construction adhesive for a couple reasons. Because every area on that base is curved, I was looking for something that would take up volume. So the regular glue isn't going to work, and the construction adhesive was thick enough that it actually provided a great bond from the flat part of the slat to the actual round area of the table base. And the last piece is always difficult. I had to cut a couple of pieces to see which one would fit tightly in there. And this finishes up the construction of the table. Got to dig the headband. It was humid, not necessarily hot, but really humid this day, and even inside with the air conditioning, it got a little sweaty. It's my rebel look. And so the epoxy that was on the tabletop, I actually spent time, I didn't have that on video, but I took that down. I started with 100 sandpaper to take the high epoxy spots off. I took it down to 150, 220, 320, and then I did some light block sanding with 400 grit sandpaper, and it's really, really smooth on top. It's hard to see, of course, until the finish hits it, but it wound up providing a really great base for finish. Now on the slats, I spent more time taking off the high spots of the corners of the slats than I did on the flats of the slats. Now, of course, I'm sanding it, but I like the rough sawn look of this, and I want it to match the first end table. So again, I'm just trying to take the sharp edges off those slats and leave some of the rough nature. Nothing that you're going to draw a splinter off of, but you get the idea of what I mean by that rough sawn look. And then, of course, finishing off the base. I didn't really, at this point, have to spend a lot of time sanding the top of the table because it was in pretty good shape. So I had to sand the routed edge and then the perimeter of the base. Now here's the color off the original table with that removed door. And as I remembered, it was just a dark walnut stain. So it's going to look darker because it's wet. I'm going to wipe this off after it sits for a while. And it turned out to be an exact match. And I never checked when I hooked up the camera that it showed a part of my little wood shop that is kind of a disaster. So hence the sign. I think in another video I'll just show you what you can accomplish in a very small wood shop. So if you're just starting out, I really love some of the YouTube folks out there. The woodworkers have got just gorgeous shops, and I'm envious. And someday I'll get there. But you can still accomplish a lot in a very small wood shop. So here's where the magic happens, finally. I'm going to put urethane on this particular top. And when I was talking about those black lines, that spalted fungus lines that you'll see in this vanilla part of the top are going to finally jump out at you. The copper tint in the epoxy is just a subtle little shimmer. It doesn't really pop out at you like the blue or the green would, but this is the look that I was going for, and I really like how it came out. But the color is, every time I do this, I'm amazed at the color that jumps out at you from the grain. You can see the circular patterns in the wood. There's even just cross patterns that kind of pop out in the wood. So the grain kind of goes everywhere the closer you get to the stump. And this one was a little higher up on the tree compared to the first table I did. That one is kind of gnarly. That one was really close to the stump, as you can see in this picture, the one on the left. So here are the two pieces together. They look great. I didn't take a picture with the coffee table, but the three pieces look fantastic together. And that's how it all came out. Hey, thanks for tuning into the video.